also you're not watching that you have been watching yourself, and you have been telling yourself something about all of this, and
Mm,
that you are trying to survive. It
mm.
doesn't matter how are you trying, if it's helping or not, but you're trying. So we tend to forget that. So when
So
you
are you saying that perception matters?
total
And you're saying that as a therapist, you are able to help them have a more effective and productive perception of themselves,
exactly,
but you're
exactly,
not trying to alter beliefs.
exactly. You don't try to alter beliefs. You just want to make clear to themselves that there are different dimensions of yourself. And in an addiction, there's a part of you that stays healthy.
Isabella, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start off with like the basics, Isabella, so that the audience can get to know you better? Just like the foundational work of where you're from, what were your family dynamics growing up, those kinds of things.
Yes, I'm from Guatemala. I grew up here. My parents were married for 40 years. But they didn't give us so much guiding in things about sex, about what we wanted from life in that aspect. And in the teenage years, I had an approach with pornography, as usually happens, but it didn't make an effect on me in terms of an addiction. And I started to talking about this problem with lots of friends in many circles.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So you said that you had an encounter with pornography. Is that what you
Yes.
said?
Yes.
And are you saying that you personally were consuming pornography? Is that what
I consumed while I was in my teenage years.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a matter of just, you want to see it, you see it, you don't want to see it, you stop looking at it.
Mm.
So I didn't understand really well how can you get caught by
Yeah.
consumption.
It
Yeah.
can be difficult to quit.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that the average consumer oftentimes thinks that they can just quit whenever they want, but
Exactly.
sometimes that's not the case.
Exactly. And it tends to go along with a lot of other situations that you're having trouble to deal with. So I started to work in groups with young people, and it was an interesting matter for me, but it became very interesting when I started to give couples some tools to manage the relationship, communication, conflict, and we get to see that it was very common and very problematic in the relationship. So I started to study psychology, and it has been a theme that people come to me for this theme, also because we are publicly known for having a program to quit pornography.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not a therapist and I don't play one online, but you are on your way to become a therapist,
Yes.
if I'm understanding that correctly. So you're currently not a licensed therapist, but you almost are there. Can you talk to that a little bit more, how your education has gone and where you're at?
Yes. I didn't thought I was going to become a therapist. I started to study this because I liked it. So I started to see into Gottman couple therapy. And then I got into the career psychology. And after that, I again didn't thought was going to study so much. After the career, I decided to do the master instead of just closing the career. So I'm in that step now.
So you're currently working with couples that are experiencing the harmful effects of pornography within their relationship?
I'm working on mostly with individuals.
Okay. Do people come specifically to you about their porn consumption, or are they coming for other issues? And then as you're working through those, their porn consumption arises?
Both things happen. It when the person comes with a clear motive to quit, it's like more direct. Usually, I use logotherapy and motivational interviewing, and we go straight down that hill. And usually, in anxiety problems or mood swings problems that don't get to be a clinical situation, we tend to discover that porn has an effect on anxiety and on mood swings also.
Okay. As people go through this process, as they come and see you about their unwanted porn consumption, or as they come to address other issues and then the unwanted porn consumption arises during your sessions, have you found that giving a diagnosis helps the individual?
It depends, because it can be very heavy to have an addiction like diagnosis, but sometimes when you get that it has all the elements of an addiction, and that a part of your brain is being
Hijacked?
yeah, then you kind of can be more self-compassionate,
Right.
and you can understand the physiological dimension of this. So it depends, because if the person feels that shame, it's a big part of what's driving the consumption, you want to normalize a little bit, not in a way that you allow the symptom, but in a way that you make the person see himself, herself, as so much more than this phase they are going through. And that's
Yeah.
very important, because the problem with addiction, I think, it's that it gives you character. Like, you think that you are this person who, whatever you're telling to yourself. And it's very important that you can see yourself as someone who's struggling with in a phase of your life, that as you entered in it, you can come out of it. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, like, yes, it's always good, or not always it's good. I think you have to get to know really well your patient, and to see what's the use.
Okay. I appreciate that answer. That makes a lot of sense. You were talking about some of the physiological changes that can happen on a neurological level when someone progresses towards compulsion or towards an addiction with porn consumption.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you find any patients that are surprised that they can be addicted to pornography, or I'm wondering if you have patients who have been surprised that they do have a compulsion with porn consumption. Like, maybe they didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
Totally. And sometimes you feel like a relief, and sometimes you feel like, so you're telling me that I have something else, and so you have to be very smooth. But what's to be understood, it's that you are searching for a way of cooling down, let's say, that trigger that you haven't learned how to manage other way. So when you take off all this, because when there's a compulsion in this kind of consumption, there usually are another kind of compulsion. So you think very poorly of yourself, or you think I'm a pervert, I'm such a bad person because I'm doing this, and maybe the weirdest person in the world, and I shall never tell anyone I think about these things. And you see, that's other way that anxiety can make you see some fears that you have. So when you explain to the person that really this is a mechanism that's not working, but in a way it's the way their brain has learned, and they are not this person they think they are afraid to be. That's a different kind of situation. They are afraid to be this person. And
it's almost like they have to separate themselves from the behavior. And I think what you're saying is once they accept that compulsion is a thing and that it's real, it helps them separate that. Is that? Totally.
And they can see how the fear of becoming this person, this pervert person, it's an intrusion the same way that if I don't consume now, something terrible is going to happen. That's also an intrusion. So when you see those triggers, you can answer another way.
It can be helpful to the consumer to understand these things, so then they can have more positive self-regard.
Yes.
And know that they're not, it doesn't reflect on them as a person necessarily.
Exactly. And because what you need to survive in life, it's like food, to drink water, and to maintain your corporal temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that you have this alarm when you haven't eaten, when you haven't drink something, when you're cold, when you're hot. So this part of your brain gets hijacked and tells you drug or whatever you're consuming is food, is water. It's so essential to you. So your brain is telling you have to, because you're going to die if you don't. So the craving, it's more than just a craving. It's a physiological need that your brain is telling you have to. You can tolerate the craving when you understand that your brain is cheating you. Yeah.
Dopamine is known as like the pleasure chemical, and it tells your brain this is a good thing. But what you're saying is that like drug abuse and porn consumption, they produce the highest amount of dopamine that can possibly be produced, which is problematic, which is why people turn again and again and again to those behaviors or to those substances.
Exactly. Yes, because there's no, in that sense, that's good that you mention it. There's no healthy measure in this subject, because it's so much higher than what your brain it's built to tolerate, that it gets totally disorganized. This all the chemical changes in your brain. So yes, totally agree with what you're saying.
Drug abuse and porn consumption are two of the activities that produce the highest amount of dopamine. So that makes sense to me. So how long have you been in this process of becoming a therapist?
For 6 years now.
And going back 6 years ago and comparing that time to today, have you noticed an increase in the amount of people coming to you for porn consumption?
I started when I started treating patients, and we were in the beginning of the pandemic. So I didn't see in the practice that change, but I did see it in the program we have for quitting pornography. The year before the pandemic and the year after the pandemic, it blew away the inscriptions. So I think that was a very breaking point for that.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm thinking back to earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that you're in Guatemala and you were talking about how, maybe I'm mistaken, maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought I remember you saying something like the porn consumption is a problem, like a very significant problem in Guatemala. Is that where you were you expressing that?
Yes, it's not so open because culture here it's very mixed. It's a very silent matter, but we do have a big problem that's more known, that kids get kidnapped for
Trafficking.
For trafficking, yeah. So we have an enormous amount of kids disappearing daily. It's incredible.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
Yes.
And you work with organizations that fight that?
We work in a network. It's not our mission. We work with people directly. We work on education. We work on therapy, counseling. But in the network, there's people that fight against. They are trying. It's interesting that you mentioned it. They are trying to put a law in Congress to regulate certain how you access pornography and things like that. But there are also organizations that work directly with victims of traffic, and it's a big network.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, going back to porn consumption and your work as a therapist in progress, mm-hmm. It can be challenging to address porn consumption. And what I mean by that is, for the person that is experiencing the unwanted porn consumption or the problematic porn consumption, it can be a challenge to actually quit. You've talked to this a little bit already. I'm just curious what approaches you take to help the people that you work with mm-hmm. experience healing and actually gain some ground towards zero consumption.
Yes. There are three things that are very important. I say three, so you remind me if I forget one.
I'm going to count them.
The first one is that you have to understand as a therapist that change is a phase that's not phase one. I want to change is not phase one in a therapy. You have to first, we say, contemplate yourself, and after getting a big look of how this consumption is hurting you, you have to go through like 3 phases more to get to the changing point. So you cannot make the therapy just about the consumption. You have to work in other areas of the patient life. So understanding that you might have a patient who is already in that changing spot, and you might have another one that it's not even starting to contemplate it as a problem. Maybe they tell you that they feel this way or that way, but they don't think that's having that effect. So you have to be very respectful of where your patient is and take him from that point to the next one and not to the 3 next steps, right?
Okay, yeah, you can't skip the steps.
Yeah, exactly. That's one. The other thing is that you have to, you're not in therapy to provide a a way of seeing the world, a way of thinking, but you do have the let's say the opportunity to educate about how you work as a human. So making your patient look himself as a person with different dimensions, where a trigger has a physiological component, but also a psychological one. But also there's a part of you that remains intact. That's very important, because what tends to happen is that you see things only in one dimension, or I am trapped in this circle of the trigger, the getting into consumption, getting in
the shame cycle,
the
and then
shame
going back
cycle.
to consumption. Yeah.
And that's all you see, and you're not watching that you have been watching yourself, and you have been telling yourself something about all of this, and that you are trying to survive. It doesn't matter how are you trying, if it's helping or not, but you're trying. So we tend to forget that. So when
So are you saying that perception matters?
Totally.
And you're saying that as a therapist, you are able to help them have a more effective and productive perception of themselves.
Exactly.
But you're not trying to alter beliefs.
Exactly. You don't try to alter beliefs. You just want to make clear to themselves that there are different dimensions of yourself. And in an addiction, there's a part of you that stays healthy. Believe it or not, there's a part of you that doesn't enter the cycle, that's watching all the process and may feel held and may be held by the physiological and psychological aspect of it, but can also be waiting for a motive, can also be waiting for a reason to stop this. And that part is always healthy. It's always there.
So if I'm understanding this correct, because I've learned a little bit about like the different identities that each of us have, it's almost like you're saying that within each of us, there's like this healthy, optimal version of ourselves.
Yeah.
We can have like our addicted identity, and then we can have that identity within us that's healthy. And you as a therapist, your goal is to help that healthy identity come and be on stage.
Exactly. Yeah, because sometimes it might be blocked. So you work in the psychological aspect and the physiological aspect, and things happen. But you have to be aware that you as a therapist and you as a consumer have to be aware that this is a way you're acting. This is not who you are. Yeah. That's very important.
So you asked me to remind you of the three things.
Yeah.
And I think you've named two, right? You talked about the different stages, and you talked about perception and the identities. Do you have the third one still?
The motive. Yes, the motive. You can't make it all about just focused on avoiding triggers or in making your life around not consuming. You have to work for a motive, for a reason, a meaningful reason for you to fill this void with something that makes you want to wake up every day. So I think that's a huge part of this. And now that I'm saying it, I think that's the way you don't want to give a diagnosis. If you do give it, you want to make sure that it's understood as something I am suffering, but not that this is all I can be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I like that. I'm going to follow my curiosity a little bit. So I'm going to ask a question, and I don't know if you'll have an answer. If you don't have an answer, that's fine.
Okay.
My curiosity was about the 12-step program.
Yeah.
Because in AA and in SAA, they often use that phrase, once an addict, always an addict. And I'm kind of neutral in this. I've never participated in AA or SAA, but I'm just curious to know your stance on if you think that's an accurate statement. Do you think that on a physiological level that that's accurate to state that once a person is an addict, they always are an addict?
I mean, I do know that you have effects that they are not going away ever in your brain and your corporal dimension. But in regards of the identity you make of this, I totally disagree. And this is hard because, as you say, and I fully feel that 12-step has done such a great job putting people together, and it's, I think, much of what works. It's that community with a same goal. So I think it's great. It's great, but I only have this I'm a little bit skeptical about you being an addict forever. I don't think
maybe
so.
It's fair to say that identity, since we talked about identities, maybe that addicted identity will still exist, but we just don't want that identity to take the stage.
Exactly.
We want the healthy identity to take the stage and be on stage for the remainder of our lives.
Exactly, which is what Jung said. I don't know if you pronounce it Jung. We say
Jung.
Okay, that there's nothing more healthier than being able to see your shadow at the face, and yes, to know that that's there, and because of it, that you can, with the light, can brighter, let's say.
Yeah. Well, as you work with clients on their unwanted or problematic porn consumption, obviously they're going to have setbacks, right? Setbacks are common, and they can also be very discouraging for the person, right? And so I'm just wondering how you work with someone as they experience setbacks, and just generally speaking, can you talk to those if they're common, and how to work through those?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's a very good question, because that's sometimes when people quit, when people stop treatment, when people make radical decisions. And coming back to what we were talking about, this notion of sobriety as an upward, let's say, way,
like
and
very
not,
linear.
Yeah, very linear, and not so much like an inside kind of every time more deeper. I don't know how to say it, getting into you, makes this false like so heavy. And I think you really need to see the person you have in front of you, the year they've spent without watching, the month, the week they've spent without consuming, which is much bigger than the day they had a setback. So we have to work with in perception in that way, but also when you fall, if after some time of not consuming, it's so useful. And I don't want to be like encouraging, but it's so useful because you get to see so much about the trigger, about your answer, about how you feel afterward, that when you're numb and when you're in the highest of your consumption, you can't see all of that. So I think that even they are necessary in the process.
I'm just sitting with that for a second. Yeah, I like that. I like that you're talking about how the setbacks are necessary and they can be beneficial we if we have the right perspective, if we frame them the right way, and if we get curious about why we had the setback.
Yeah, totally. And just the fact that the person is so sad about the setback, and you can make people see the person see you didn't feel this when you were in it so hardly.
You're
You didn't
actually
feel that.
feeling, at least now you're feeling.
Yeah.
I like that. Talking about setbacks, I think that a setback is evidence that you do need to do more work. There's more work to be done, right?
Yes, totally. And it usually takes some time, but when you teach your patient to recognize when that part of your brain isn't leading, it's very useful. And that's where mindfulness come in as such a good tool, because when you're in this not leading part of when your brain is not leading with the
it's almost like instead of mindful, it's mindless, right? When you're in a mindless state.
Yeah, exactly. So when you teach how does that feels and how does mindfulness feel, the person can do it. I like to do it with the hand, because if this is your limbic system and the one that gets triggered, you want your how do you say it? Could you repeat it?
Is it the prefrontal cortex?
The prefrontal cortex. You want it to hold it, to embrace it, to connect. So that you do with breathing, with mindfulness, but you have to first notice that it's not connected now. Because every person that knows well the cycle can talk about that automatic, like almost automatic way of getting into. I saw the trigger. I was very, very conscious about it, but then you get into a automatic, like
it's an automatic response instead of just sitting with the emotion and becoming mindful.
Exactly.
Oh, I like that. Well, we've talked about some of the work you do with individuals that struggle with porn consumption. And I'm also curious if you work with individuals like their partners.
I haven't worked with partners. I've been a partner. So I'm very interested in group therapy for partners. It's a project. It's not on motion yet. But what I can tell you, it's about my own healing process in that sense. And what happens is when you, again, with a label of addiction, get yourself around the addiction, you can also start to make a void in your life, and you stop chasing meaningful things, not because you're how do you say it? We say codependiente or codependent.
Oh, codependent, yeah.
Yeah, it's not that you're a sick person that needs to carry others or something like that. No, it's you really love your loved one, and you really want to not see them struggling, and you want to connect in a deeper level, and you want to have a rich and full life. But you can, in that intent, actually not notice when your life starts to get empty. So self taking care of yourself,
like self-care,
thank you, it's a huge part of loving your loved one that's struggling.
Yes. So taking care of yourself is part of that process. Exactly. And you said that you experienced that type of betrayal, meaning that your partner I don't know if it's your current partner or a former partner.
I had a failed marriage.
Okay.
And yeah, and it couldn't be saved, but I stayed in the field because I think there are a lot of people that could get use of what I've learned.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you experienced some of the negative effects of pornography in your relationship with your former spouse.
Yeah.
And now you're kind of working towards helping others avoid those pitfalls.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's
Yes.
so cool. That's so cool. Well, can you speak to when you first learned of your former partner's porn consumption and how that made you feel?
Yes. And this is very important because often therapists can see the partner just like a setback for the person that's trying to get out. But you have to understand that person is going through trauma, because when your trauma is not an event, but the way you process
Right.
things, right? But it usually is because when you have built your relationship over the idea of a sexual intimacy that's exclusive,
Right.
this has all of the elements of a betrayal.
Right.
Even more because if it could be another woman, for example, another man, eh, at least it's another woman, at least it's another man who they can touch and who they have a connection, and because maybe you and I have a connection problem, anything, but it's with no one and with a lot of women at the same time. So when you can't define the object of the betrayal, it's more heavy even.
That's
So
how you perceived it in your personal
yeah,
experience?
I perceived it that way, and I was in a lot of group supports, and it was a common experience because you can't um, you can't wrap your head around about ending a relationship because of something that you think it's not that big thing.
Yeah.
Versus a betrayal, an affair. So
Right.
it's difficult.
Yeah. What emotions did you feel as you first learned about it? You've mentioned the word betrayal several times. As you experienced that betrayal, did you also experience things like anger or rejection or loneliness or shame?
Yes, totally. I think you instantly want to look at yourself and see why am I not that desirable? It's just that
Right.
you get it all twisted because you think he prefers or she prefers this to me. That's how you can get to signify it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because pornography does perpetuate false expectations. One study that comes to mind, it's a national poll here in the United States. And according to this national poll, 6 out of every 7 women reported that they believed that pornography changed men's expectations of how women should look.
Yeah. Totally.
And it's not just physical looks that are changed or that are perpetuated as false expectations, but also just like generally speaking, women in pornography are generally portrayed as like always in the mood.
Exactly.
That they are, they're up for sex anytime, anywhere with anyone.
Yeah.
And so I think that, those false expectations can be ingrained into an individual's brain, and it can be very challenging. Like you just can't compete with those false expectations because they're not real.
Exactly. And you, as a husband or as a wife, you can start to question yourself. Why, if this person in porn looks always happy, always in the mood, always, why is my husband so unsatisfied? There's something very wrong with me. you do not tolerate well feelings, and you tend to go to porn to numb feelings. That's a feeling you want to numb, that you're not enough to make your wife, your husband happy all the time, and wanting to have sex all the time, and wanting to be pleased all the time. So I think it works in a very deep ways in our mind.
Thanks for sharing some of those personal things that you've had to experience. We really appreciate that. As you worked through them, so you experienced the betrayal and those other negative emotions that we talked about, what else did you do to experience healing in your own personal journey?
Yeah, the first thing I think was to be clear that when you want to walk with someone, when you want to share your life with someone, you can't force anyone. I mean, there's a part, like we were saying, an identity that's choosing this. There are other identities in ourselves that might be reinforcing this choice you make. But if by some reason the person is not choosing you in a way, I mean, I don't want to be misunderstood. It doesn't mean that he's not or she's not choosing you just because he is in the cycle, but wanting to get better and wanting to find meaning and find sources of strength to get out. It's a way of choosing you. So if the person is not choosing the relationship with you, you have to understand that in a way it's not about you. In a way, it
doesn't reflect on who you are.
Exactly. And you maybe do have to heal much of the rejection you feel, but you have to remember that I don't like playing a victim in any kind of situation, because if you choose this relationship where maybe connection, intimacy was not at the center of your bonding, then you must have had a reason also. So, because that's, I feel in my experience, that's the most important thing that that pornography does to the relationship, like the incapacity for real intimacy. So in a way, we can't think that this incapacity was just in the other person.
So you're talking about, in your experience, you had to accept the role that you played to allow this to happen.
Exactly.
Like, what role? You started to question, what role did I play in this process? How come I hadn't set up boundaries or had more conversations about it?
Exactly. And not only about it, but about ourselves. Because often you find that the level of connection is very low when sexual life has become very like automatic, like and it tends to happen when some of the two of you are consuming, so or the two of you. So it's very important to notice that there was a lack of intimacy, maybe even before the consumption.
Yeah. And when you say lack of intimacy before the consumption, it's not just a lack of sexual intimacy. It can be that as well, but it can also be just when we say intimacy, we're talking about all levels of intimacy, intellectual intimacy, emotional intimacy.
Exactly. And I think, if you might let me go just a little bit off the rails.
Of course.
Culture today has such a big impact in that, because we're not used to intimacy. We're used to a very light connection. And intimacy is not about like opening up everything from the very first moment, but it's about letting the person in through your psyche, but also through what's behind it. So that healthy part of you,
Yeah.
which desires, which dreams, which suffers and has motives to get up again, and we
Yeah.
don't tend to connect to that level.
Yeah. When I think of intimacy, I think of genuineness, acceptance, empathy, focus.
Yeah.
And when we don't have those, I think sometimes we turn to things like pornography to fill the role of that. Well, I really like that you talked to your personal account. That's really powerful. And I think that's really cool that that's one of the drivers behind you continuing your education to become a therapist.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've seen it goes so broad, you say?
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's so connected with so much more themes. We were speaking with someone that sex is so much more than just the
Physical act.
physical act. It's so much more. It's like food in that way, because food it's not just about getting fed. It's a cultural thing. It's a moment,
connection thing.
It's a connection thing.
True.
It goes even to beliefs, to what you believe about intimacy, about friendship, about sharing a table. So it's so much more in a every aspect of the human. It's so much more than just the physiological part of it. But in sex, it's so big, because it talks about who you are in your most true self, in a way that you can look out, like that you can come out of yourself and meet the other one.
Yeah.
So even physiologically, we are built to not to see our bodies and ourselves, but to look to the front, right? Out of myself. So I think sex is a huge thing of who we are.
Yeah.
As human beings. Yeah.
Yeah. We're all here because of sex too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, are you proud of where you're at today?
I'm very proud. Really,
Good.
I'm very proud. I never thought that such a painful road would take me to such a joyful place.
Are you familiar with the term post-traumatic growth?
Yes.
Yeah. So it seems like you've experienced some post-traumatic growth.
I think so.
That's good. Good for you. Well, I want to leave you with the opportunity to have the last word during this conversation as we come to the end. If there's anything that you want to speak to that we haven't talked about, or anything you want to re-emphasize, now is the time for that, if you have any last thoughts.
Thank you. So maybe a word who's suffering and doesn't see a way out. It's very important. I know that's much of what you do, but to know that you're not alone, in a sense that everyone is searching for more intimacy. Everyone, even though they are not finding it, sometimes everyone is lacking some degree of connection. And the fact that you're struggling with this and not with other things doesn't say much about you, but about luck, sometimes about what you were exposed to, about what the life has given you.
Right. It's like all of us are unique individuals with unique biology, unique experiences. And sometimes that biology and sometimes those experiences are just, oftentimes we are just given what we're given.
Exactly. But they work, even though we can't choose that, they work as a, how do you call when you jump to a pool?
Like a diving board?
Yeah, it works like a diving board.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
All of those circumstances in your life that you hadn't choose or you couldn't choose, they can be that
diving board,
because what
or that
you can do,
springboard.
or
I
the
think that
springboard.
the term might be springboard.
Yeah, because what you can choose, what it is in your hands, is what you're doing with it. What you're doing with it, not getting rid of it. You won't get rid of what has been in your past, but what you're doing with it, where you want to take it to. You're not over. You're here. You're alive, and while you're alive, there's time and there's hope. So don't lose hope. That would be.
Thanks, Isabella. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You're great.
Thanks to you. I'm really happy. I'm really happy that we could do this.
Yeah, us too.
I'm sorry for the English. I'm practicing.
Don't ever apologize, because your English is really good, and we love your accent. It's beautiful, yeah. So don't ever apologize for that. You did great.
Thank you.
We're a global movement of over 6 million fighters worldwide. We're continually growing, and it is because of our fighters that our resources have been able to educate and raise awareness on this issue across the globe. Included in our globalization efforts are our ongoing translation projects, which involve professionally translating select materials and resources into other languages. See what translated resources we have, including our documentary, Brain Hard World in Spanish, our conversation guide, Let's Talk About Porn, and more. Visit ftnd.org/translations. That's ftnd.org/translations.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Consider Before Consuming is brought to you by Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest and the conversation we had, you can check out the links included with this episode. If you've found Consider Before Consuming beneficial, consider subscribing and leaving a review. Again, big thanks to you for listening to this conversation. As you go about your day, we invite you to increase your self-awareness, look both ways, check your blind spots, and consider before consuming.